So just a little bit about me. My name is Alejandra. I'm an FIU alum. I went and I got a graduate degree in Gulf Studies in Qatar. And Gulf Studies, for those of you that aren't really familiar, it's the study of the Gulf region. We don't really say Persian or Arabian Gulf, because according to Google, I'm not sure if you heard about this, Google put out a poll asking whether or not it was the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, and a lot more Iranians voted in that poll, and so it became known as the Persian Gulf, but the Arabs take offense to this, so we just ambiguously refer to it as the Gulf. The Gulf region includes Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Yemen, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. My research is specifically focused on Saudi Arabia because I think that Saudi Arabia really is sort of the linchpin to that part of the world and arguably to a lot of the Muslim world. A lot of Saudi money goes out throughout the Muslim world and they fund a lot of mosques. So therefore, when we learn more about Saudi Arabia and the Islam in Saudi Arabia, which we'll learn a little bit more about now in my presentation, I think you can really contextualize a lot of things that are going on throughout the Muslim world. So today we're going to talk about how Snapchat is affecting the lives of young Saudi women. Now, I do want to say that it's not just young Saudis that use Snapchat. People who are of our parents and even our grandparents' generation use social media in a way in Saudi Arabia that we could not understand. For us, our generation, we see our aunts and our uncles and sometimes our grandparents on Facebook, and that's it. In Saudi Arabia, you're seeing like grandparents on Snapchat, and they use it, and they know how to use it, and they use it often. So the effect of Snapchat on society is something that's really, we don't really know how it's going to affect in the long term, but right now it's having very significant effects. So we're going to start off with the basics. What is Islam? So Islam is an Abrahamic religion. That means that Muslims believe in the God of Abraham, the other two Abrahamic religions being Judaism and Christianity. It was founded by the Prophet Muhammad in 1570. Islam means submission to God, and Muslims believe in the 5 pillars of faith. The 5 pillars of faith being Shahada, which is when you declare your belief in Islam, in God being the only one true God and Muhammad is his prophet. Salat, which is the prayers. There's 5, in Sunni Islam, there's 5 prayers a day. Zakat, which is alms giving. Muslims are required to give 10% of their net worth in alms annually. Saum, which is fasting, typically in the month of Ramadan. There's also a couple other feast days where they fast. And then Hajj, which is pilgrimage, which is, here we see, you can see it in both monitors. You see this is the Grand Mosque in Mecca. It actually looks pretty empty. There's other pictures where you'll see during Ramadan or when they go just before at the end of Ramadan is when they do Umrah, but during Ramadan is when a lot of people go do the unofficial pilgrimage. They call it the little pilgrimage, which is Umrah. They go do Umrah because during Ramadan it counts as Hajj, and you're gonna see that there's like several floors in this mosque. The amount of people that go pray is incredible. So originally, much in the same way that Christianity was intended to be an extension of Judaism, Islam was intended to be an extension of Christianity. However, the Christians did not accept the Muslims or the Prophet Muhammad, and therefore, instead of facing Jerusalem when they prayed, Muslims then now turned to the Kaaba, which is, you can see it, it's that little black dot in the middle. And so they face the Kaaba, which is inside the center of the Grand Mosque. That's where Muslims face when they pray. The holy text is the Quran, and Muslims believe that God gave miracles for people depending on their time. So in the time of who they refer to as the Prophet Isa, which is the Prophet Jesus' time, people really believed in the scientific miracles. So that's why the miracles of Jesus were very like medical and scientific. In the times of the Prophet Muhammad, the miracle is the miracle of the Quran, which is the word of God itself Muslims really do revere the words of the Quran as being very poetic. It's a miracle. It's not just regular words. That the words of the Quran are the miracle of the Quran. So the hadith it's a collection of the sayings of the Prophet, and this, along with the Quran, they pretty much are what Muslims look to as guides. Then an extra supplement are the Sunnah, which is the practices of the Prophet. For example, Muslims will, those who particularly adhere to, like very specifically to the Sunnah, there's obviously more, I don't want to say conservative Muslims, but they're more orthodox Muslims that are going to try and follow the practices and the examples of the Prophet more literally. For example, these people will take 3 sips of water and then take a breath, because this is the way that the Prophet did it. So I'm sure, as you know, there's 2 main sects in Islam, Sunni and Shia. About 80% of Muslims worldwide are Sunni. So Sharia, just in case you guys aren't too familiar with it, we hear a lot about it on the media. Most of it is completely misconstrued. This is a map of the different schools of fiqh, which is jurisprudence within Sharia. Sharia is basically like the canon of Islamic law, and then within it there's different interpretations. So Muslims believe that the Sharia is the comprehensive, eternal, immutable, and divine law of Islam, because they believe that the Quran is the word of God. This is the word of God. It's not like, oh, a person said this. No, this was transmitted through the Prophet Muhammad, but it is the actual word of God. So the framework of the Sharia is provided by the Quran and the Sunnah, and it governs all aspects of life. I don't know if any of you have taken, there's like another class that one of the other professors teaches. It's called Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. In that class, the professor talks about how Jesus, in his time, he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God. This does not exist in Islam. The Prophet Muhammad was both a statesman and a prophet. So there is no differentiation between political life and public life, or religious life, social and economic. Everything is come together. There's a unity of life, where all aspects of your life are governed by these laws. So the Sharia was compiled in the Middle Ages using fiqh, which is jurisprudence, the hadith, consultation and consensus, and analogy. Now I do want to point out the difference between fiqh and Sharia. Sharia is derived from the word of God, where fiqh has the connotation of having man-made elements. Where the fiqh is still jurisprudence, it has been tainted by man. It's not perfect in the way that the Sharia is, because Sharia comes from God. So the madhabs of Islamic jurisprudence, the madhabs are the schools of jurisprudence. If this is the same picture, we're going to look at it a little bit larger on the next slide. The 4 main schools of Sunni jurisprudence are Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi'i, and Maliki. The key difference between the Sunni and the Shia schools is that the Shia, they replace ijtihad, which is independent reasoning, with analogy. Ijtihad is something that's very important in Sunni Islam, and we're going to come back to it later on in the presentation. It's very significant, specifically because of the lack of hierarchy for example, the Shia have their imams, but there's a very specific delineation between the different in the hierarchy, reaching to the point of Grand Ayatollah. In Sunni Islam, you don't have that. The relationship is between you and God, and there's not supposed to be an intermediary. So ijtihad is very important, especially in the era before the internet, where you needed to do the independent reasoning in order to understand your religion and the whys of your belief. Because there was really not that many people around to explain it to you. You needed to make sense of it for yourself. Now, in Shia Islam, you have imams. There's a hierarchy, much in the same way that, for example, the Catholic Church there's priests, and then there's archbishops and bishops and cardinals. Shia Islam has a very similar structure, and except, of course, obviously, the higher levels are the Grand Ayatollahs. So instead of the consensus being between the people. In Shia Islam, the consensus is between the leadership, the clerical leadership. So this is the map. This camera looks a little bit better, so I'm going to go over here. As you can see in the map, the different schools are really geographically dependent. This dark green right here is the Hanbali. So you can see that depending on the regions of the world of where the Muslims live is their interpretations, because that's really what the different schools are of jurisprudence. It's the cultural influence on their interpretation of the Sharia. So the status of women in Islam is something that's a very complicated, very loaded subject. I often get asked, much in the same vein of, oh, the oppression of women. It's not just, oh, women are oppressed or they're not oppressed in Saudi Arabia. The oppression of women is a universal issue, and it's the cultural traditions of the patriarchy that oppress women. It's not just one country or one system of government, and it's not one religion. I don't think you can argue that Islam is any more oppressive towards women than Christianity or Judaism or anything. So there's this misperception that Islam is inherently chauvinistic. This is false. The Quran prohibited infanticide in the times of the Prophet, where female children were often buried in the sand and killed. They would kill the female children. And so in the times of the revelation of the Quran, the Prophet, he decreed that you were no longer allowed to kill female children. And so while usually the argument is, yes, well, Muslims are allowed to marry 4 men. In the Quran, at that time, men had multiple wives. And the limit was set at 4 with the condition that all wives were treated equally. This is very significant and often or almost exclusively ignored. So while, yes, men are allowed to marry up to 4 women, you need to also contextualize this with the fact that this was done at a time when these are nomadic people. A lot of the men were necessary in order to perform like tasks for daily life. So this was intended in order for there to be a protection for widows, for example, for widows and orphan children. It wasn't just, oh yeah, like how many virgins are going to wait for you, like now that you're a Muslim. It's not like that. It was honestly it was to take care of the people in the community. And there's also an extra condition that you need to be just. What you give to the one wife and one household, you have to give to the other. Now, people being people, humanity has corrupted this, but that was not the intent. And also, very significantly, women were given inheritance rights in the 6th century. This is way before other systems of government were giving women inheritance rights. Granted, it's not the equal distribution that is given to men, but it's still something. And it's in the law. Women are granted inheritance. So these are some of the key terms that we're going to talk about. Some of them we've already spoken about. Some of them we're going to talk about now moving forward. So for example, fiqh, we said, is jurisprudence. The madhabs are the schools of jurisprudence, and they're significant because you're going to see how in some cultures and in some societies, what something is halal or Islamically permitted is going to be haram in others or Islamically forbidden. So what's halal and haram can sometimes be subjective to what is the school of jurisprudence. For example, there's the school of jurisprudence of Northern Africa that they argue that the woman must accept the proposal of marriage. In other schools of jurisprudence, the woman doesn't need to accept the marriage, and it can be her father or her guardian who accepts in her seed. So ijtihad is independent reasoning. This is really important, and we're going to keep this in mind moving forward, because the delineation between the importance of ijtihad and how it is or isn't being used today is something that's really significant. The Wahhabiyya, it's the religious political movement that it's born in Central Arabia and is so intrinsic to Saudi society for the last couple hundred years. So it really is something that you can't separate from the Saudi identity. Tawheed, this is really important because Tawheed is the absolute oneness of God. It's not just monotheism. It has a lot more of a weight to it than the word monotheism does in English. And the Tawheed, or that belief, that core belief, is very important to the Wahhabiyya and to the Wahhabi movement. Shirk is also going to be important moving forward because Shirk is idolatry. It's the worship of idols. So because of the importance of Tawheed in the Wahhabiyya, Shirk is also very important because it's a deviation from that. It's the worship of idols and therefore polytheism, which is a very big deal in the Wahhabiyya. Fitna is also something that we talk a lot about when we talk about the Wahhabiyya, and also for those of you who are familiar with the Salafis. Today we use Wahhabiyya and Salafi almost interchangeably. They're significantly different, mostly because of the political connotations of both. So they're not interchangeable, and please look up why. So fitna is temptation, but it also has these connotations of distress and trial because of the misdeed that you're doing, or the misdeed that you're tempted to do. Hijab is something that I'm sure you have heard a lot about. Hijab means modesty. And if you look into the Quran, in the Quran, when it talks about modesty is not just how you dress. It's how you behave. It's a way of life. You behave modestly. You don't just dress modestly. Although today we use hijab as synonymous with headscarf, that is not what hijab is. Hijab is modesty, and the Arabic words for scarf are either shayla or tarha, if you want to be more specific. But hijab nowadays, and it's not just here, it's not in the West, it's not Western academia, it really is just like a global phenomenon where hijab is reduced to a headscarf. Niqab is the face veil. There's going to be later on in the presentation a picture where you can see what that face veil looks like in case you've never seen it in real life. And the abaya. The abaya it's usually between ankle and floor length. It's a very thin, black, usually polyester material. It's a robe. It's a long, flowy robe, and you throw it over your clothes when women go outside. So, and it's the same with the headscarf that they wear in Saudi Arabia. In other countries, pretty much at this point, everywhere except Saudi Arabia, the abayas they're fashion-forward pieces. They're artistic. Dolce & Gabbana even has an abaya line. These are, in most other countries, the abaya is part of your expression. In Saudi Arabia, the abaya and the headscarf and the niqab that they wear are not fashion. They're just utilitarian. They're something that you use to go outside because you need to go outside, and that's it. They're just plain, simple, black, thin robes that you use because you need it, and that's it. So what is Wahhabism? There's a lot of misconceptions about what is Wahhabism. So within Islam, there's Islam and there's Sharia. Then you have the schools of jurisprudence. One of these four main schools of Sunni jurisprudence is the Hanbali school. Now, within the Hanbali school of jurisprudence, which, I don't know if I can see, you see that dark green. That dark green is the Hanbali school, and then within that, there's this movement that one could call a reformist movement. People object to the use of reformist. However, I choose to use it because I do think that the intention of the movement was to reform Islam as it was being practiced at that time. So the Hanbali tradition, within that comes the Wahhabiyya, which is this movement that it starts in the 18th century in Central Arabia. And so to get into the technicality of the term, if you say Wahhabism or Wahhabiyya or Wahhabi to a Saudi or to a Qatari, because that's the other country where it's prevalent, they will most likely be offended. They don't like the term. They take very big issue with it. It's something that up until a couple years ago, honestly, maybe not even a handful of years ago, was a big point of contention. This is something that is almost exclusive to Western academia, and they don't like it. They think it's reductive. They think that it sounds like they're worshipping Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, who is the founder of the Wahhabiyya. However, it's just, we use it for a lack of a better term. That's really what it is. It sounds like Western imperialism, but it's just the lack of a better term. What they prefer is muwahidun, or those who affirm the notion of tawheed. They don't like monotheist either because they think it sounds too much like Christianity. So there's this whole lack of consensus in academia and in the Muslim world as to what to call it. For lack of a better term, we're going to call it the Wahhabiyya. So Tawheed is something that is very significant to the beliefs of the Wahhabiyya. The reason for this is that at the time, there was what this man, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, he's the gentleman in the picture, he saw the practices of Islam at the time where he was living, and he was offended by it. He didn't like it. He saw what was going on around him, the practices of Islam at the time, and he thought that there was all these innovations. So a big thing with the Wahhabism and the Wahhabiyya is not innovating with your practices of your Islam. So it's maintaining that core belief in the monotheism and only worshiping the one God, and complete and utter rejection of anything that is shirk. So the thing is that this is a very broad interpretation of what constitutes shirk. It's not just okay, you're not going to worship the statues of other gods. No, they really do. There's an issue, they will take issue with, for example, paintings of faces. You're not supposed to revere or worship anything that could approximate your worship of God. So in order to not even potentially cross that line, you don't go anywhere near the line. So they have this sense of they're returning to the pure Islam of the times of the Prophet and his companions. So the companions of the Prophet are known as the Salaf, which is where Salafi comes from. The Salafi are trying to return to the practices of the Prophet and his companions who existed at that time. So what happens is, in the Wahhabiyya and in the Salafism, is that you're getting this practice of Islam where it's better safe than sorry. We're not going to try and figure out what it is that's okay and what's not on our own. We're not going to employ ijtihad in order to figure out what is acceptable and what is not. Instead, we're going to stay away from it altogether. Better safe than sorry. And that is really what I think is the core of the practice of the Wahhabiyya. It's not just the beliefs, but in the practice of this kind of Islam, it's better safe than sorry. So Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, who is this gentleman over here in this picture, he was a theologian and a preacher from Central Arabia. And his preachings upset the leadership of the settlements where he was living, and therefore he was forced into exile. He took special issue with the veneration of burial sites, and there was certain idolatry happening in his time, and he took great offense to that, and therefore he activated very passionately for the destruction of these burial sites. In Sunni Islam, you only they don't put markers on the grave. All they put is a rock, usually a sizable rock, at the head where the head of the body is, just so you know that's where the head is. You're not supposed to have any markings on the grave site. So it's in order to prevent this idolatry of the dead, or the worship of the dead, or the potential worship of the dead. So then this gentleman over here with the double ropes, this is Muhammad bin Saud. Muhammad bin Saud is an ancestor of the current Al Saud family, and he was the chief of Diriyah. Diriyah is a small settlement just outside the Saudi capital today of Riyadh. It's about a 45-minute drive now. And it's pretty well preserved. If any of you are ever in Saudi Arabia, you should check it out. And so along with the ideology of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, Muhammad bin Saud was able to unite the tribes around him into the first Saudi kingdom. And there's more than one Saudi kingdom. The first one lasts from 1744 until 1818, at which point another rival tribe comes in and takes over. That tribe is still there, by the way, and it's pretty funny to hear them talk about the rivalry between that one tribe and the Al Saud now. So this picture I thought was really amazing. I was excited to find it. This man in the middle who's seated, this is the last king of the Hijaz. The Hijaz was the kingdom that ruled the holy cities and the port city of Jeddah. Jeddah is basically the Saudi version of New York, if New York was over 1,000 years old. Jeddah is a huge port city. It's very important and significant to the region, and it's the gateway to the two holy cities. This man, Prince Hussein, is also the ancestor of the current Prince of Jordan. Then you have over here, this is the first, he's Muhammad bin Saud, who established the first Saudi kingdom, and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab. And this gentleman over here is a British officer. So the Wahhabiyya and the state. The second Saudi state is pretty short-lived. It only lasts from 1824 until 1891. And then in 1932 is when the third Saudi state is established. The last, we call him Ibn Saud. He was in exile in Kuwait. He comes back with a group of about 40 men and retakes his ancestral home of Diriyah. And from there they launch an attack and they unite the tribes of Arabia into what is now Saudi Arabia. You can see in the map that the dark green is the first Saudi state. The second Saudi state is that medium green. And sorry, it's not, these are all the first Saudi states. It's just the different eras. It starts off relatively small. You can see in that middle, the white dot, that's Diriyah. That's their original holdings. It expands eventually into Oman and including Qatar. This little chunk right here, that's Qatar, and the UAE. So with his force of tribesmen, Ibn Saud unites the tribes of Arabia into what is today Saudi Arabia. And those tribesmen, it's actually a sad story, they are known as the Ikhwan. The Ikhwan are the brothers. The Ikhwan are unhappy with the modernization of the kingdom under Ibn Saud, and they become rebellious. Then he enlists foreign help, and under the guise of a battle, some planes come, bomb out the Ikhwan, and that's the end of his loyal force. That was the force that helped him unite the tribes. So then in the 1950s, oil is discovered in Saudi Arabia. This is significant for many reasons, as I'm sure you're well acquainted with. But then in the 1970s, something happens. There's an offshoot of radicals, and they lay siege on the Great Mosque. If you can imagine what that would be like if, for example, a group of radicals decided to take siege on the Vatican. That would be a really big deal. The thing is that you're not allowed to use force or weapons in the Grand Mosque, and the government had no way to end this siege. Also, keeping in mind that it was a very underdeveloped military, the government didn't know what to do. How are they going to do this? There was hostages involved, and this is the Grand Mosque of Islam. This is in the Holy City. This is a huge disaster of epic proportions. What they do is they enlist the help of the clerics, including the Grand Mufti, which is the head cleric, and they ask him to please issue a fatwa. And a fatwa is, it's like, it's a decree, basically, by the religious scholars who are basically saying this is acceptable, this is not. And the Grand Mufti comes out and he says it's okay under extreme duress to use military force in the Grand Mosque. So with the help of some French paramilitaries, the government goes in, they kill the terrorists, and they end the siege. However, this starts a new era in the relationship between the clerics and the government, where now the state is sanctioning religious opinions from the clerics in order to meet their needs. And the clerics, they're going to acquiesce because that's who pays their salary. At the end of the day, they pay their salaries. These are government jobs. So the government and religion at this point really do, like, their symbiosis becomes solidified. So as keeping in mind the relationship between religion and the government in Saudi Arabia, they really at this point have become one. The morality that is being dictated by the religion is now also literally coming from the government. You learn it in school because all government schools, public schools, teach religion. So the government is telling you what your religion is teaching you. The government is able to discern what religion says is right or wrong. So your morality is being not just taught to you by your religion, but it's being interpreted for you by the government. So this better safe than sorry approach to fitna and to shirk, so you're avoiding temptation and you're avoiding idolatry, it manifests itself in three major ways in Saudi Arabia. In this picture, I don't love it as much as a less quality picture that I found. This is a McDonald's. You really do have two separate lines, except in this picture, they don't have, like, there's like a plastic median in between. So, like, the men aren't supposed to look at the women while they're in line at McDonald's. In almost all public spaces, there's either a singles entrance and a family entrance, which means men and families, or women, or it says female and male. Everywhere. In the airport, when you go to security, there's a separate females entrance for security. For when you go through to get scans, there's a separate female entrance for that. Everything is segregated in order to avoid fitna. So in order to avoid gender mixing and to avoid impure thoughts or impure behaviors, they segregate public spaces. Now what happens? The men's areas are almost always better. They're better equipped, they're cleaner, they're nicer, and the women's areas are usually neglected because for the most part, a lot of them aren't going to be used to the same degree, or the people who are in charge of maintaining these places aren't accessing the female sections. They don't see what the female side looks like, and out of sight, out of mind. That's the main issue because, well, for example, the Supreme Court in the US says separate is not equal. In Saudi Arabia, in order to avoid this fitna, the temptation of gender mixing, they keep the genders separate, but as we know, separate is not equal. This, personally, as a woman living alone in Saudi Arabia, what I found was that, for example, if I had some kind of conflict, if I had an issue, not just me, but a lot of my coworkers, if you're a single woman and you have an issue, usually the person who needs to fix that is a man. And in order to address that man, you have to go to the men's section. First of all, not all women feel comfortable going into an area that is all men. And you're going to be the only woman there. And who knows if it's going to be 5 men or hundreds of men. And also, in order to avoid fitna, the man can choose, no, I don't want to be with you in a closed room. I don't want to be in close quarters with you because I want to avoid temptation. And so he has every right to say, no, I don't want to see you because he's trying to avoid temptation. And the government says that that's okay. So then you're kind of out of resources because what are you going to do? There's no male to advocate for you because you're a foreigner and you really lack the resources to challenge this. For some women, this is very challenging. For other women, it's not as challenging. It really does become subjective and a case-by-case issue. Hopefully, most of the times you can resolve your issue, but sometimes your issues don't get resolved because that man chose not to sit down with you, and that was his prerogative. He can choose to not meet with you, not to speak with you at all. So another form of avoiding fitna is the abaya and the hijab. So here you see that's from the back. It's just like the simple black abaya. The purpose of it is that you don't see the shape of the women's bodies. More conservative women will wear an over-the-head abaya. So you can't even see the shape of the shoulders. Because when you wear a headscarf, you see the neck and shoulders. So if you wear an over-the-head abaya, it starts off from the top of your head, and it goes all the way down, and it's just, there's really no shape. They'll usually have an opening for the face, and then the women will wear a niqab underneath. And so the face veil is covering your face. There's a tiny little slit, if there's any slit at all. There's a lot of different combinations of how this modesty is applied. However, Saudi women are required by law to cover their hair and to wear the abaya. However, social pressure is what forces women to wear the face veil. It's very rare for Saudi women outside of Jeddah, which is basically New York, to go out without face veils. In Riyadh, which is the capital city, which like any major city is going to be a little bit more liberal, women do walk around without face veils. However, throughout the Saudi countryside, in the villages, in the smaller towns, it's very, very, very rare to see a woman leave the house without a niqab. A Saudi woman. Non-Muslim women are not required to cover their hair. For example, last year I lived in a smaller town of about 100,000 people, and I was the only woman that walked around without her hair covered. And I'm like ethnically ambiguous looking, but still, you can tell that something's not quite, I'm not quite Saudi looking. So it was okay. If I had looked more Saudi, it would have been a bigger problem. So another manifestation of this extreme approach to avoiding temptation is in the religious police. Now, granted, the religious police in the last couple of years have lost a lot of their power. They can no longer make arrests. They can't physically beat you anymore. In the old days, they had sticks and they could hit you. The purpose of the religious police is they're supposed to talk to you and convince you and in a kind manner teach you better. However, as we all know, when you give people a little bit too much power, it corrupts. And so the religious police was causing a lot of PR problems for the Saudi government. There's a lot of issues with it. They were getting out of hand, and to be noted, the religious police are not these like very theological, philosophical people. The vast majority of them they're convicts who memorize the Quran while in jail. The only requirement in order to be religious police is that you memorize the Quran. So again, these aren't philosophers. They're not theologians. They're convicts who most of them didn't finish high school, who memorize the Quran in jail. When they leave jail, they get a job working as religious police. So I think it's really important to talk about how the morality is performative in Saudi Arabia. This is what you would usually see when you see Saudi women in public. Now, the difference is that women obviously don't look like this all the time. This is what they look like, especially when they're going to be photographed. They're not like us. We're being photographed from infants. We're photographed from infancy. This is normal for us for generations. We have photographs of several generations back. Saudi women, now I'm not even saying that all of them walk around wearing niqab all the time, but if there's going to be a picture, they're gonna cover up. So that's why in a lot of the pictures you see them looking like this, because it's for the picture. When Saudi women go outside, they put on their abayas, they put on their headscarves, and they put on their face veils. For example, I taught at a university. At the university, there's a gate. The second you walk into the gate, the girls are already taking it all off. So all day, while they're at school, they're walking around in normal clothes. When they're getting ready to go home, then they find where they rolled up their abaya, they put it back on, they wrap their headscarf, they put on their face veil, and they walk out. They only dress like this when they're in public spaces. They don't dress like this all the time. Underneath their abayas, they're wearing regular clothes. Yes?
Is this just an all-girls school, or does it
Everything is segregated. Everything. There's a couple of private schools, like the higher class public private schools, like the American school will be mixed, but for the most part, I would say about 99% of schools are segregated.
And do they, like, if it was a private school and it was like a class like this with like both sexes, would they cover up or would they take it off like in school?
It would depend. It would depend. I had a friend that went to the American school in Saudi Arabia, and the Muslim girls that covered would cover their hair, but they would be dressed normally. They would have uniforms, or they wouldn't have uniforms, but they would be dressed in normal clothes, and then when they go out is when they cover up. So the public piety is enforced by the religious police. For example, the religious police, they go around making sure that all the shops close for prayer time. They go, and if there's a hefty fine if you don't close your shop for prayer, and they're there to force people to go to the mosque to go pray. That was their job in the old days, and they could actually force you to go do it. Now they can only tell you and kindly encourage you to go do it. Before, they could actually force you. So another thing that the religious police and social pressure both enforce in public is this concept of modesty. Men are not supposed to be ogling at women. Women are supposed to be dressed a certain kind of way. And the thing is that you can see there's one woman who has her face uncovered, and you can see that her abaya isn't black and plain. She's probably not Saudi. She's probably not Saudi, and if she is, she's probably not from a tribe. Because the role of society is a very collectivist society, unlike ours, and so the social pressure really does play a huge role in keeping women in this performative piety. The wearing of the black abaya. Why aren't they wearing purple, blue, or red abayas? You see them in the shops. I had a blue abaya. I would ask my students, and they would say, we wear them to like weddings. But out and about on the street, everyone is appearing pious to a degree of austerity. It's a very austere expression of morality. So the thing is that what people mistakenly assume is that the way that they behave in private is the same way that they behave in public. This isn't true. For the most of us, this isn't true. Now, in some societies, yes, the way that we behave in public is the same way we behave in private. However, in Saudi, the contrast is pretty shocking. And we're going to go into it specifically in how that expresses itself in Snapchat usage, I believe in the next slide. So if those of you who have Muslim friends or you are Muslim yourselves, I'm sure you've heard there's no compulsion in Islam. Islam doesn't force you to do things. However, in Saudi Arabia, the government and society do force you to do things. And in the absence of social pressure, so when you're in private, when you're behind closed doors, the behavior of Saudis changes drastically. There's a very drastic difference in between the way people behave in public and how they behave in private. So I'm sure that most of you have heard this term of public space. So public spaces are generally accessible to people. There are things like parks and streets. However, in Saudi Arabia, women don't really go outside. First of all, it's hot. And it's not customary. Women don't really go out and take up public space. Men were the ones that traditionally went to the markets. It wasn't women. So women don't really go outside that much. If they go outside, it's usually to private areas. They have private areas outside the houses. If they're going to go outside, that's where they go. What has happened since the advent of the internet is that women are given this literal space to express themselves that has never existed before. So this has been a huge change for the way that Saudi women behave. And has also created these safe spaces for the minorities and marginalized communities. And because now there's all kinds of groups. There's Facebook groups. There's you'd be shocked how many young Saudis meet in Instagram comments. That's a big thing. Like a lot of young Saudi couples meet in the comments on Instagram. So why Snapchat specifically? Well, for those of you who use Snapchat, which is most of the students, you're aware of how Snapchat works. Now, I like this one better because you can see it a little bit clearer. So on Snapchat, you have different ways of interacting. You have the pictures. You can send pictures, either post them publicly on your feed, or you can send them privately directly to your friends. You can set the picture settings in order to disappear after a couple of seconds or to just last until the person closes it. However, when that picture is closed, that chat is closed, it's gone forever. And in the event that someone takes a screenshot of your picture, you get a notification. So this provides a level of privacy that doesn't exist with Instagram or Facebook. Saudi women, for the most part, very rarely have Facebook accounts. Why on earth would they want to put their picture or leave any kind of like public trace of their activity? This doesn't make sense to them culturally. So that's why Snapchat makes so much sense. There's also the chat feature. Again, on Snapchat, when you close a chat, the chat disappears. If someone saves it, you know it got saved in the chat. To take a screenshot, you know because it notifies you. And then this is your feed. Now, what Saudi women post on their general feed is shockingly different to what they post in private. On their feed, they're posting these beautifully curated pictures, a lot of them with like Quranic quotes. A lot of them are landscapes, or the coffee they're drinking, the flowers of their centerpieces. Saudis do take their photography on Snapchat very seriously. They really are, honestly, We do not do Snapchat the way these people do it. We don't. We just take pictures. They're like, it's artistic. It really is art, the feeds that these women create. Now, what happens on private is very different. You're getting a lot of, I don't know if you guys are too young to remember Kylie before she had the baby used to do like lip syncing videos. She used to post a lot of snaps of her lip singing. Saudi girls do a lot of like lip singing with like the head bobbing. There's a lot of selfies. There's a lot of filter usage. So what they're posting in private is themselves doing all kinds of regular things that normal people do. However, this is not behavior that is socially acceptable in private. So it's very significant that they are doing this and that they're posting this. Not just that they're doing it, but that they're creating content that exposes this kind of behavior to other people. That is so significant. Now, the difference is that for most of us, most of our usernames, for our emails, for our social media handles, we use our real names. In Saudi Arabia, this is not a thing, and if anything, it's very frowned upon. You should not be using your real name on social media. This can very easily bring shame upon your family and your tribe, so don't do it. That's not a good idea. Now, an extra layer of how their activity is curated is that they have 2 accounts. The cell phone penetration in this part of the world is over 1, which means a lot of people have more than 1 cell phone. So what you have is you have 2 cell phones, you have 1 Snapchat account for your family, or for your more conservative friends. It's very PC, it's very curated, it's very safe. And then you have your other Snapchat account with a very fake name that no one can trace, and it's you doing all the things that you would be doing in private that you don't want your parents to know about. So for the girls, it's more sexual behaviors, it's their faces for starters, it's doing all the things that you wouldn't want your parents to know about. And then for the guys, it's posting a lot of drug and alcohol content. That's really what it is. Sometimes they have like their pet monkeys or like their pet lions, but for the guys, it's a lot of bottles of alcohol and that sort of illicit stuff. So the thing is that they're performing these illicit behaviors, but there's no way to trace it theoretically. We all know everyone watches Snapchat anyway. The governments are all watching. But the point is that it's theoretically not traceable. So this has allowed them a level of freedom that no other generation has ever been able to have. So when you think about the enormity of this change for how women are going to develop their, like on a personal level moving forward, for starters, these girls all know what Coachella is. And I've asked my students, how do you know what Coachella is? Teacher, Snapchat. They know all, they're so up to date on American pop culture. They know who all the Kardashians are. They can contour better than all of us put together. Like, these girls are, like, they're really at, like, this cutting edge degree that we, like, really don't participate in because for the most part, we're pretty apathetic. But for them, this is new and they're taking advantage of it to a degree that we don't appreciate on this side of the world. So what are the implications of this? The fact is, they're really immeasurable. We can't really measure what the implications of these changes are going to be on Saudi society moving forward, because the drastic change in these generations, generation by generation, has been so monumental that we can't really compare it to any other society. This is something that's happening for the first time. So what's happening is that globalization, specifically through social media usage, it's normalizing fitna. So these things of these girls that are dressing in these ways, boys are seeing girls dressed in ways that they would never see in the real world. You have to think about the fact that there's Saudi men who don't have sisters. Maybe they don't have a mother, they don't have aunts. What women do they interact with on a regular basis? Think about men who have no regular interaction with any women at all. And then think about women who have no regular interaction with men at all. At least having brothers and sisters, that's a certain kind of social conditioning. But not having access to the opposite sex at all, it has consequences to your behavior. And now you're seeing things like porn. The access to porn has exploded because now we all have smartphones. It's accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, it's not just the usage of drugs, it's exposure to seeing other people use drugs on Snapchat, on Instagram, on YouTube. Think about all the content on YouTube, Netflix, all this media is exposing these generations to these things that they don't see in real life. But not just that. Like, the exposure is to a degree where it's 24/7. If they want to watch this content, they have access to it. So it's the porn, it's the drugs, it's the alcohol, music. Music, until very recently, was considered haram in Saudi Arabia. Only in Jeddah was music heard in public places, like in restaurants. And only now, in the last year and a half, are you seeing restaurants or cafes in Riyadh, which is the capital city, playing music. Music is not played in public spaces. When I had to cover units on music in my classes, I had to ask my students ahead of time, if you think that music is haram, please be warned, the next class we're going to talk about music and there will be music played. And I have had students who have said, teacher, I think music is haram. And I said, okay, you can wait outside while we listen to the music. I would have to say it as a disclaimer when I would mention music in my classes. The university says music is haram. And the students would be like, teacher, please. And I would say, no, the university says music is haram. So if you think about the fact that they have been raised, not just them, their parents and their grandparents have been told by the government and by the religious scholars that music is Islamically forbidden, think about how much music, even Instagram now, on your Instagram stories, you can put music. Music is such a huge part of our daily lives, and this is bombarding them with all these things that all this fitna, it was all fitna. And now it's something that they're exposed to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So they're becoming familiar with this content that was inaccessible just a couple of decades ago. The internet is a relatively new thing. So having access to all this content at your fingertips, because we all have smartphones, everyone has tablets, there's computers, everything. This is before the government was able to censor this, but now with the internet, Saudis know how to use VPNs, they know how to get around all the censorship, and they're going to do it. They know how, and they're going to do it. What's happening is that another effect is it's revolutionizing gender dynamics. Men are seeing women who are uncovered for the first time. You're seeing women online, look at how girls dress, like in YouTube videos. Pick a category of YouTube video and look at how girls are dressed. These are men who are seeing women only covered from head to toe their whole lives. This is a huge and drastic change in their paradigms. So not only that, but also we need to also think about the comment sections. You really do hear a lot about how many young couples meet in the comment sections on Instagram. Not just like sliding into your DMs. Like they're actually meeting in the comment sections. It's like a very common occurrence, which I found really shocking, but maybe it's because I'm just old. Like this is like a big deal. A lot of couples meet in the comments, and a lot of couples will meet because like, oh, you snapped that picture, and then your friend's gonna message you, hey, who's that you're with? And this goes both with hetero and with like same-sex couples. This is really just like revolutionizing gender dynamics and romantic relationships, like right now. Right now, the change is it's crazy. Like I really can't stress enough how big of a deal it is. So the thing is that in the past, the youth could be restrained from mixing by force. It was like a thing that the religious police would come in and they would disband parties. Like if you were having a party, the religious police would come and they would break it up and you would go to jail. That was a thing that happened. And now social pressure and the religious police, they're not enough to coerce the youth from mixing because they can do it online whenever they want. And so another thing is that it's the erosion of the Wahhabiyya and therefore the state's monopoly in dictating morality. The government was being told by the Wahhabiyya, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. And then from there, now, they don't have a monopoly on that anymore. I have to speed up. Okay, so the use of fatwas, which were these religious opinions, they were being used effectively to control the public. And public behavior was being controlled by these fatwas. But now, the government, it doesn't get to say what's right and what's wrong anymore because you're seeing things online and you're like, hey, I don't think that's that bad. I think it's okay if I talk to a guy or a girl. I think it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. Or I'm going to do it even though I think it's wrong. I'm going to do it anyway because I want to. So the religious scholars are really losing their influence over society in a very significant way. The habits and the behavior of youth is being changed drastically for every generation of Saudis since the kingdom. At this point, it's about like 4 generations. And arguably the most radical changes have happened since the beginning of the internet. Just a generation ago, it was unfathomable that a woman would be posting her picture on the internet. This was something that you couldn't even imagine. And now it's a regular occurrence. This is something that is extremely significant. And now the social contract between the state and society is going to have to be renegotiated, because the Saudis, their first loyalty, their primary identity is Islam. And Islam in Saudi Arabia is tied to the government. So your loyalty to your Islam was also loyalty to the government, because the government is what's maintaining the Islamic society. Now the state's moral monopoly is being challenged. The ruling coalition between the highest level of religious scholars in Saudi Arabia, they're all the descendants of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab. So it really is the descendants of the 2 founding fathers of the Saudi dynasty, the Al Saud and the Al Wahab. They're still the ones that are in power today. The religious clerics, the religious class, comes from the descendants of Ibn Abdul Wahab. It's the Al-Sheikh. And then you have the Al Saud, which is the government. And a very significant number of citizens are employed in religious ministries. The religious scholars is a huge, it's a huge ministry. The teachers, religious teachers in schools, the imams at the mosques, there's mosques on basically every corner. It's a huge sector of the government, of public, I'm blanking out. It's a huge sector of public employees are employed in the religious ministries. So think about how many people are not going to bite the hand that feeds. If they're employed by the government, they're not going to criticize the government, because the government pays their salaries and feeds their families. So what's going to be the source of legitimacy for the regime moving forward? What can it be? Because at the end of the day, Saudis identify as Muslims first. But how are they going to interpret that Islam is to be determined. So Saudis identify primarily as Muslims. What identity will unite Saudis? There is no strong sense of nationalism. There's no strong Saudi national identity, especially given the number of minorities and marginalized groups. There's a significant Shia population. There's also a lot of Saudis that aren't from tribes. What identity is going to unite these Saudis if it's not their Islamic identity that's derived from the Wahhabism? So we also can't underestimate the significance of the holy cities. The proximity to Mecca and Medina is really important in cultivating their Islamic identity. Saudis a lot of times don't travel abroad. When they travel, they go see the holy cities. This has a really big impact on their identities. So can the Al Saud survive without the Wahhabiyya? Spoiler alert, we don't know. And so that is the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any quick questions? Because we ran over time. I'm sorry. Okay, you already asked one, so I'll come back to you. Yes?
Thank you. Can you speak on the introduction of Snapchat to the Saudi?
So what a lot of people don't know is that Saudis have been at the forefront of the internet since the beginning of time. Saudis were using Skype before we even knew what Skype was. So they've been using all these new social media apps to a degree that we haven't been, because we don't really feel like we need them. I don't know if you guys know about House Party. It's an app that I didn't know about. It's something that they really use a lot. They're exposed to apps on social media much quicker than we are. They jump on that bandwagon much faster than we do, and they exploit these social media apps much more than we do. So they were on Snapchat before Snapchat was really a thing over here, and to a much greater degree than what we were at that time. You had a question?
Yeah, you said that a lot of the youth are on Snapchat and stuff, but you also said that like those grandparents are on Snapchat. What are they doing, and what are the parents of these children thinking? Like, if they know what's going on, are they stopping their children from getting on like these types of apps? Or?
The thing is that they curate the content that they show to like their aunts and to their parents and stuff. Like usually their dads aren't gonna, if you're a girl, your dad's not gonna follow you on Snapchat, but your mom and your aunts will, and they're gonna be looking at your feed.
And they don't know you have two Snapchats.
And they don't know that you have two Snapchats. That's the trick to it.
Not common knowledge.
So like amongst the youth it is, but amongst older generations, they seem to be unaware of the fact that there are two different accounts. Anybody else? Yes.
Do you think the usage of social media affects radical Islam? Like, I know they use social media as a platform to like recruit.
Yeah, Twitter is a really big deal for ISIS. We've known about that for a long time. The thing is that in Saudi Arabia, you're not really seeing Snapchat used for like radicalization. Snapchat specifically is more used for youthful shenanigans. It's all the stuff that you wouldn't want your family to know about that you're doing on the DL. You do it on Snapchat. And you post about it because if not, like, what good is it to do it if you can't, like, humble brag about it? I'm sure that there is like some usage by like radicals, but it's not like a common thing. Twitter is usually where that stays. Twitter, and there's another like WhatsApp alternative called I think Telegram. Yeah, so Telegram is where a lot of that is. Like apparently like Telegram like owes its popularity to ISIS, is the way that like I was told. Like Telegram really does become more popular because that's what like ISIS uses. Anybody else? Nobody? Well, thank you very much for listening and paying attention.